First of all, I would like to ask you, what's the main challenge to American higher education, in your opinion?
Well, the United States has, well, at one time it was #1 in high school graduation rates, students going on to college and getting a degree. Well, the world has caught up and the competition is a lot fiercer, and now the United States isn't #1 in the country when you compare OECD countries, more developed economies generally. So we really need to figure out ways to actually increase degree production, quality of the programs and degree production. And so President Obama has put out a goal for us to have so many more students get degrees. Then you add in population growth, and those are the two things. How can we grow a system in what I call smart growth? What is a logical way to grow higher education in the U.S. that can take on more students and get them out with a degree?
In U.S., what's the difference about between California and the other states in U.S.?
Well, California is famous for having a very high quality system of higher education, but unfortunately the state has really suffered financially over time. Not that the economy hasn't grown, but the ability of state government to subsidize the public higher education sector, which is around 82% of all the students in California are in public institutions of some sort. So we've had this really just dramatic reduction in funding for higher education. And what I like to say is it's been over the last 2-3 decades, we've had a lot of small cuts, and it hurts. You know, you can die by 1,000 cuts. But now with the Great Recession, we've had just a really large cut, 20% cuts in state budgets to higher education over the last 2 years. We'll probably recover out of that, but it's a major factor that has hindered, and California is also growing in population, hindered our ability to bring in students and get them out with a degree. Yeah, well, there are a lot of things that are shared, or problems that we have, and then there are differences that relate to culture. You know, in the U.S. and in California, we've had a mass higher ed system in one form or another since really the 1920s, and we've been building and developing. It takes a long time to develop mass higher education systems of quality and effectiveness. So in my view, yes, Brazil has many challenges, and they're related to class, they're related to geography, the differences between the states. It's also infrastructure, but at the same time, from an outsider's viewpoint, major strides are being made in Brazil. You're really seeing, and there's a debate about how to do things, how to change things, how to create new types of institutions, as they've done in the state of São Paulo with the FETEX. And from an outsider's view, I think Brazil is really making big strides if it can continue the momentum and the investment. And just to always remember, it takes a long time to develop systems that can really, you know, take on, become mass higher ed systems of quality and effectiveness. You know, and at the same time, you need to have an array of institutional types. So a place like, you know, the USP or Unicamp, you need those places also that are really of high quality within that overall landscape. So in my view, Brazil is moving in the right direction.
In your paper, you was talking about a Brazilian effect that U.S.
You saw the paper.
U.S. would, yes, yeah. The
Okay.
United States have to be careful with Brazilian effect could happen.
Yes.
What is that?
Okay, well, I have to apologize to my Brazilian colleagues on this, to use this, because I think actually, from what I understand, again, I'm learning about Brazil, and that's partly why I'm here, to learn more, is that you're actually making some strides to deal with that. But what that is what and I've used this to try to make Americans and Californians understand the phenomena in a place like California, and that is that what we're having is more and more demand for higher education and an inability for the public sector to keep pace with that. So that means in California that we have a lot more for-private institutions taking up some of that demand. Some of that's great, fine. Some of these institutions are of good, the for-profits in the United States are of good quality, but many are of very questionable quality. And the fact is, in the end, the taxpayer is paying for that. That's because in the U.S., students can get a federal loan or a grant from the federal government under certain conditions and go to a for-profit institution. So they come and take that money. So we're actually making a choice of public resources. Private universities often have 80 to 90% of all their operating budget is coming from students getting federal loans and grants. So what I'm trying to urge is it's okay to have a private sector, but it's a matter of balance. How does your society most effectively use your resources to support higher education? Which institutions are the most effective? And I think that you need a balance. And in Brazil, I would still say, an outsider's viewpoint, that you still have too much reliance on the for-profit sector. I know there's a mix in there of independents that are of good quality, Catholic universities and this type. You have too many. What I worry about California is the lack of resources means our public system can't keep pace with population and will become too reliant on the for-profit sector. So the struggle in the United States is what's the right balance? Should there be, the structure is different. Students go in, a majority of students go in without a declared major or field. They have a 4-year degree program. So we have to structure a program in which they can choose as to where they want, what field they do want to major in. So our discussion is what's the right balance, a breadth and depth kind of argument. Should these GE programs, which are a mainstay, I mean, every institution has them, should we, make them more narrow and defined, or should it really be just a larger kind of, as was discussed, a cafeteria of a selection for students to have options to figure out what courses they want to take? So that situation's different. In Brazil, I think what you see is a real opportunity. It's difficult, though, to at least create another stream for students to come to the national university and perhaps other parts of the system. I think you have to differentiate different institutional types and how well it fits. And well, not to argue that there still shouldn't be this structure which is effective for some students to come in and be in a very specific field. The opportunity to at least be exposed to other disciplines. One, to make them better physicists or engineers. Another is that perhaps there's a cohort of students that when they get in, they have a year or two to figure out what is the field that they are most capable at or that they're most interested in. Motivation is a huge factor. If a student feels motivated in a field, inspired, it makes a big difference in the overall educational outcomes of that student and their talent. And then again, when they go into society, how an effective worker they are, how knowledgeable are they about society, all those things.
You think general education can bring this motivation?
It can be a component to it, perhaps. And I think different student motivations. So a key to a lot of things about higher education is providing choices for students, that there are various places they can go. They can go to different kinds of institutional types. Maybe this one institution has a vibrant GE program. It attracts a student to go there. So really it is about student choice to some degree, and it's about pedagogy for institutions like Unicamp to think about, well, what are we doing with our students? What kind of student do we want to come out of our institution? Should they be only capable in a narrow way in a specific field, or do they have broader, as we say, a word we use in the United States, cultural competencies? Do they have a broader understanding of society? One of the models that came out of the U.S., and I hesitate in using this term, but in the earlier development of some of the major universities, whether it's a public or private like a Stanford or a Berkeley, was this concept that we were going to produce engineers and scientists and others who were the future captains of industry, okay? And that they had broader knowledge. They knew how to operate in the business world. They knew how to start up a business perhaps, or they knew how to become good participants in local communities. So now it's more like the captains of society or people who are leaders in society. That's an important goal. Institutions need to experiment and create models. My guess will be that a place like Unicamp will do this. Will have some component in their program. It's not necessarily every student, but there's an option. It will attract different kinds of students of talent. and that other institutions will see it as a model and they go, oh, they're getting really talented students, they're having good outcomes, there should be a process of assessment and evaluation as to what it's doing. But this is nothing that happens overnight. But once these models are developed, other institutions will see the need for it. Now, what's the role of perhaps the state or the federal government, national government? It should be very careful not to over-direct this, but it can provide perhaps special programs or resources to encourage that. That maybe an institution could apply for that and say, we're going to develop this kind of a program. That's the kind of a role for national government. And as I noted in this conference, I think you could see some models, and you have very similar dynamics to the general education movement in Europe, which is still very young, but you can see different patterns and efforts to develop these programs. But it will take time. It's nothing that will occur overnight.
Okay, what do you expect to learn here in Brazil?
Well, there's many things. One is I'm always fascinated by the intersection between higher education institutions and what they're doing and where they're going with the politics in a particular country. So this is an area that I look at in the United States. What's the politics of higher education? How does it influence policy? How are these systems of higher ed or individual institutions developing? So that's one important area. And within that, I'm also very interested in science policy. What is the role of science policy in economic development? How is Brazil approaching this particular question? Because this is a worldwide movement of national governments and businesses understanding that science policy is also economic policy. So those are two areas. Then there are many others that I'm hoping to learn about.